Hi, I'm Rachel Lancaster, and this is the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started. And the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now's our time. My guest today is Juju Hook, and Juju is a consultant, coach, and speaker. She's a brand strategist who had her own midlife awakening, which led her to write a rather cool book called Hot Flashes, Carpools, and Dirty Martinis, the quintessential guide for turning midlife into prime time. She is passionate, like me, about getting women out of a midlife funk and into living their very best lives without limitations. Welcome, Juju. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
We've known about each other for quite a long time, haven't we? We've never actually managed to meet before. So
years. We've like ships that passed in the night.
I know, because we share the same passion, don't we? We just want midlife women to realise that this is prime time. This is the time to shine. Yeah, so
this is it.
What led you to doing what you do? Why? What happened to make you want to do this?
I had a pretty prolific corporate career. I was a brand strategist first in the financial industry on the client side, and then I owned an agency that I opened when our son was born, and I didn't want to travel anymore. So I kind of started to do my own thing. And when I hit my late 40s, I started to have a lot of questions. I think at first they weren't in the front of my mind. I think I was carrying them around with me, in the back of my mind and maybe in my heart, about whether or not I was still relevant. And I think I had sort of accomplished the dream that a lot of people have, which is I'm going to create this business, this amazing business, and I'll get to the point where I don't have to work a lot and still make great money. And I did that. I worked really, really hard, and I did that. And then I had a lot of extra time on my hands. I just had a lot of free space to be alone with my thoughts and with my fears and, the things that your brain provides to you when it has nothing else to do. And I had a night when I realized that I was about to lose a client. It was a big client, and I had a big team on the account, and they had worked super hard, and I could see it coming. I knew it was within months, and I kind of panicked, and I just started to have all these thoughts about, am I going to be able to replace this with another national client? And are they going to prefer a younger woman? And, am I really up on this stuff? And everything's digital now, and I grew up in an analog world, and, blah, 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 all the things that we think about ourselves at a certain point in life. And I decided to knock back a couple of dirty martinis, which, is never the best choice. And at that time, I was doing that more often than I like to admit. There were things that I think I felt that I just didn't want to feel. And on top of it, I was very, very overly involved in my teenage son's life. I had a lot of free time, and, he was doing a lot of stuff that didn't necessarily suit me. And so I got very involved. And the next morning I woke up, I was pretty hungover, thunderous headache, and we had a flood in our house. My in-laws were here from Germany. It was absolute early morning chaos. And as we were kind of mopping up the floors and figuring out, how to get rid of this water, I recognized that I hadn't woken my son for school. And when I did wake him, it was a show. I can't even tell you. He was furious at me that I had woken him late, which was really indicative of our relationship, right? Like, what kind of 13-year-old needs to be woken up by his mom? And if a fight ensued, he crawled out the window into a rainstorm. It was a mess. And I took him to school and dropped him off. And on the way home, the principal called and said, what's going on at your house? He was someone I knew. My son went to a really small school, and he said, it just seems like Christian's really stressed out. It seems like he's under a lot of pressure. And I just wonder, is everything okay? And I kind of launched into everything I was thinking about Christian, which was, he's not really dialed in and he's not trying and he's going to skate through life and, he's always going to be mediocre and, all of this stuff. Right. And he stopped me and said, I wouldn't say this to everyone, but I feel like you and I have a relationship and I don't think this is about him. I think it's about you. And it was a really shocking moment for me in a lot of ways. And it was one of those moments where a whole bunch of dominoes just fall and you start to look back, over the line of dominoes about your perspective on things. And it just was a big eye opener for me. And I think over the course of, I don't know, maybe the following days and weeks, I had this realization that I had never really given myself a chance. And in the phone call, he encouraged me to go do something I was afraid of. He said, I don't really think Christian needs you like this anymore. And I really encourage you to go do something you're terrified of. And I had always been a writer and never written my own words. I built a career writing other people's words and making great money at it, but never my voice. And so I decided to write a book and become a speaker. And I eventually shut down my agency and started a whole new career.
Wow. It's a great story. And I know that's how the book opens, isn't it?
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
It's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, it was painful. It was a painful time. And it was a painful time for Christian and I. I think we don't talk a lot about what happens when you have puberty and menopause in a house together. But it's a fantastic show, let me tell you. The sparks do fly.
Yes. Yes. That's the thing, isn't it? When women hit midlife and we are going through all those changes, and it is our own puberty in reverse. And then it coincides with just so much, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think, we don't talk a lot about it. That's the one thing that really sort of shone through for me as I started to talk to women is that the presentation of menopause in our lives that we hear about from so many people is that it's an ending, that it's a loss. Right? And so we go into it without any excitement. There's no, it's like this door, so you feel like it's a door slamming, or that's the way it's presented. And, now that I've really spent time in it and around it and learning about it and studying it and talking to women about it, it's really just the opposite. It's a really beautiful transition into a time of power and insight and really enhanced intuition and mastery and all of these things that we've spent the whole first half of life working toward. And nobody ever talks about that. Nobody ever tells you that it, when you're 7, we're all sitting down going, ooh, this is what my life will look like, right? I'll get married and I'll go to school and I'll be this when I grow up. And nobody tells you you're supposed to do that again at 45 or 50.
I love that. I mean, that's why I really wanted to connect with you in the past and why I, just gobbled up your book when it came out because that's absolutely where I am as well. And there's a wonderful thing over here in the UK now. Menopause is actually going to be on the curriculum in school. It will be in the sex education syllabus.
Outstanding.
So it doesn't end with reproduction. It will go all the way through. But that's a really new thing, and I'm slightly concerned whether that syllabus will still be negative. At least they'll cover it, but will they still reiterate it's a time of loss narrative, which drives me bananas.
Yeah, it's like pregnancy as a sickness, right? I mean, we get these sort of ways that we label certain transitions in life, and I think it happens more to women than it does to men. In terms of how we're labeled, right? And every time I see someone talk about menopause, it's a problem. It's problematic. Mm-hmm. In the same way with aging, we have, I'm not sure if it's the same in the UK, but we have an enormous anti-aging industry here in America,
huge,
right?
Huge.
Just absolutely billions of dollars a year. And none of the money is spent on living longer. All of it is spent on helping women look as though they haven't lived as long as they have, right? Mm-hmm. And discussing our problem areas. but they're not. They're only a problem because the anti-aging industry labeled them as a problem and then sold us a fix. So I think the narrative and the messaging is a lot to wade through during a time when we're also, unsure and a little bit gobsmacked. And so I think we have to be careful about what we take in.
I talk about the need for us to be prepared, not scared. And that's very much
Yes.
what I want, just to get the message out there. Because for some women, yes, it may be very, very difficult. But for some women, it may not be. And at the end of it, as you say, there is this whole new life waiting for us if
Yes.
we choose to step up and grasp it, if we choose to make the most of it instead of sort of retreating. And I see a lot of women, they will retreat because we've been taught to retreat. We've been taught that
The older we get, the less we're worth. That's
Exactly.
what we're taught. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah. But we're not taught that by women who've been through it. Right? We're not taught, we're taught that by, by industry and by
Yes.
men.
Yes.
I hate to say that, but it's true. So I think there's like you said, there's a relearning, right? And it comes in the preparation. It really does. And I also think that it's really common to get good at not feeling the things we don't want to feel. We find ways to do that, whether it's, Pinot Noir or cookies or, shopping or whatever it may be.
Netflix
And
binging.
Yes, right? Anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Romance novels, anything to take my mind off of what I don't want to feel. And this is one of those times where you really have to lean into your feelings because it's your desires and your instincts, your intuition that are going to guide you into how to create an amazing second half of life. And if you cover up the feelings, you never get to that, right? At the same time, I think we come to believe that our feelings are facts, right? I feel lousy, so this is a lousy time. And I think we also have to be really careful about believing everything we think and turning our feelings into facts because it's dangerous.
Yeah, I love the way you talk about that in the book, and you talk about the maths that we get wrong, don't you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We do have a lot of bad math. Yeah, women.
What are the other examples of bad math?
My thoughts equal reality, which is just absolutely untrue. Your thoughts equal BS, really. It's just your brain firing things off. It's a machine to try to protect you. And your past is a reliable predictor of your future. I meet so many women who tell me this tomorrow will be this way because yesterday was this way. And it's entirely inaccurate. What's a predictor of your future are your actions. So, that's just bad math, bad equation.
And we limit ourselves by believing those things, don't we? We just completely shut down all the possibility.
We do. And it's really interesting because back to the thoughts, right? Your brain is, has two functions really for survival, right? One is to predict what will happen and prepare you for it. And the other one is to protect you. And neither one of those things serve us when we want to try new things or make change, right? The first thing your brain's going to do is say, no, don't do that, right? Let's be certain. And if we do nothing, we can be absolutely certain of what will happen, right? If we do what we did yesterday or the day before that or the day before that, we know how it'll turn out. And that's exactly what your brain wants for you. Your brain wants certainty. It's safe. But overriding that and recognizing that, this is simply a prediction machine. These thoughts happen to me. They are not me. They're not from me. They come to me, and I think recognizing that and sort of letting the thoughts float by and not buying into it is part of the trick to generating a new vision, a new idea, a new set of possibilities for what can happen.
And what are some of the other lies that we tell ourselves? Because I know you go into quite a lot of detail on this in the book, and I just love it. It's brilliant.
The biggest lie that I hear from women in midlife is what I call the lie of extenuating circumstances, meaning it's easy for her, right? That's easy for her. because she doesn't have to deal with what I deal with in life, right? I hear it from women all the time. That won't work for me because I'm this or I'm that, or I have this to deal with or that to deal with. And it's such an easy lie to dispel, because at any point in time, there are literally millions of women who have circumstances much harder than your own that are doing things that, you know, are much more gutsy or magnificent or thrilling, right, than what we're doing. And I think it's that's another protectionary instinct, right? Oh, I have this many kids, or I only have this much money, or, you know, I feel this way. I have, you know, these are my physical limitations, or this is what's going on in my relationship at any point in time. And these external circumstances tend to dictate our happiness or our, you know, possibilities, to use your word. And that's entirely untrue. The ability to move forward in a different way comes from inside you, not outside you. And I think that's it's an easy lie to tell because it lets us off the hook, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's the number one lie that I hear from women. I also often hear that I'm running out of energy, right? Like we're light bulbs. And there's only so many hours in each one of us. And at a certain point, we're just going to shut down. And it's also not true. You know, it's just absolutely untrue that we're going to lose our power at a certain point. I feel more powerful now than I did when I was 25 or 30 or 40. And it just keeps coming.
And it's also about listening to the messages, isn't it? Because if we really don't feel we have the energy, there's probably some reason for that. Don't just say, I don't have the energy, but think, okay, well, why don't I have
what's
the
going
energy?
on with me? And also, every single day, someone's firing messages at you telling you don't have enough energy, who wants to sell you something that'll give you more energy, right? Like literally, I only need to turn on Facebook or turn on Instagram or turn on the television before I'm fed a bunch of products that apply to me specifically based on my age and my interests, right? That tell me, hey, if you've lost your energy at whatever time in the morning, you should do this. Or, you know, if you can't sleep at night, you should do this. And so it's this constant, you know, back to the narrative that someone's telling us about this. And it's really, really easy to adopt the lies. You know, the same thing with selflessness. We get this belief as we go through life that it's noble to be selfless. It's noble to give ourselves away to whoever needs us, our boss, our kids, our spouse, our, you know, the neighbors, the pets, whatever. And in doing so, we sort of enter into this a little bit of martyrdom.
Oh,
and we don't get what we want. We are comfortable in the idea that I've given myself away and therefore I don't need to strive or try or, you know, take a risk for what I want. And so the lies kind of keep us stuck. I call them the lies that bind.
But they keep us safe as well, don't they? I mean, as you were talking, I was just thinking, you know, you've gone out there and you've written your book and you've published your book.
Yeah.
I've been sitting on my first draft of my book for months. And I know perfectly well that the reason why I am not finishing it is fear. I know that because if I don't publish it, I can't fail, can I?
Exactly.
I won't get the bad reviews. I won't get this is a load of twaddle.
Well, you know, what's interesting too is the way we perceive pass fail, right? This is another thing I talk about in the book. Is by the time we get to midlife, we have this idea that everything we're doing is you're either going to win or you're going to lose. Right? So we build it up, as though this is the only time in your life you'll ever write a book, right? It's one and done. It's the only book you'll ever have. What people say about it is direct reflection of your value as a human being, right? So write this book, and if you can't do it, if it doesn't work, well, then that's it, right? It's all over. This is the kind of the way we perceive it, and it's the way our brain feeds it to us. Yeah. And the truth is that anything that we start, especially redesigning a second half of life, is a series of actions and course corrections, right? We act, we course correct, we act, we course correct. And this is the way we learn anything new. We have a certain entitlement to success, I think, at a certain age, right? If you were beginning to play the guitar tomorrow, you wouldn't wake up in the morning and say, well, If I spend the next 8 weeks writing my first song and it's not amazing, I'll never be a guitar player, right? You would recognize that there's a ramp up. And so I think that's another thing that we kind of get lost, is this whole idea of everything's riding on this, or I'm going to embarrass myself, or I'm going to die from other people's judgment of me. It will ruin me. And it won't. I can tell you, I've had as many flops as I've had successes in the last 4 years. And it's pushing through those things that don't go well and being able to evaluate them without shame or self-recrimination that gives you the resilience to do it again the next day.
Because we sure as hell do judge ourselves, don't we?
Oh my gosh, we do. And we judge each other.
Yeah.
Right? Like we only judge ourselves. We only judge other people on the ways we judge ourselves. You know, if you're walking around talking about, you know, how big women's butts are, or arses, I think you say where you are, right? That it's a sure sign.
We say butts, but arse is very good.
Sure sign that you're doing it to yourself, right? We only judge people on the things that that we're cruel to ourselves about. And so I think, you know, that judgment, and I've had so many stops and starts, you know, when I first came into the market where I wanted to build an online presence. I joined a mastermind group, and it was predominantly, I didn't know when I joined, this was a lesson, but it was predominantly a group of young men who were very conversion savvy, right? They were digital marketing savants, these young men, and I felt very inadequate in the group. But the initial assignment was a webinar. And you know, the way I was instructed by my coach and my mentor was, hey, listen, you're going to do this webinar and you'll keep perfecting it and keep doing it until you make $1 million at that product. And then you can do something else. And I'm going to tell you, I did 50 weeks of webinars. And there were so many times that I shut off my microphone and threw myself down on the floor. You know, back to the entitlement, the first one I did, I was so sure that I was going to break through like Amy Porterfield, you know, or Marie Forleo, that I had my nephew, who's a salesperson, and my closest friend, who's a salesperson, over to the house to handle the overflow sales, right? This, in my mind, this is how it was going to go. It was like, I'm either going to sell, you know, 1,000 of these things tonight, or I'm a loser, right? My first time. I bought a meat and cheese tray. They still laugh at me about it, that I bought them snacks, right? Because they'd be so exhausted from all the selling they had to do. And nothing happened. Crickets, nothing, right? And it just would have been so easy to say, this is it. I'm done. You know, but I didn't. I picked myself up. It wasn't pretty. I'm not going to say I handle it well, but I handle it. And I moved on and moved on and moved on. And I think it's that feeling of judgment and shame that stops us from moving forward. And we have to be able to remove that from the equation. Everything's an experiment.
And everything is an opportunity to learn. It's like fail, first attempt in learning. I love that.
It's true. It's true. And I think also we come to believe that we should be able to do things that are not necessarily in our wheelhouse, and we don't know why it works. So, you know, webinars were really hard for me, and I didn't realize until much later that I operate with a feedback loop, you know, that I need that feedback loop. And so I'm quite successful on stage because I can feel the room. I can feel the energy in the room, and something happens with the feedback loop that allows me to be spontaneous, that, you know, I get data, right? And that I respond to the data. But with a webinar, there's no data. You're just talking into a black hole. And that requires a certain kind of personality, a certain understanding of the process that I didn't have. And so in that place of judgment, it's, oh, I'm not good at this. I'm not good at this. I stink at this. I'll never get this, right? And in a place of curiosity, in a place of learning, it's what's going on here, right? What's going on here that I need to shift or change. And it's very, very hard to do that when we're in a place of self-loathing or recrimination.
So how can we move past that feeling of self-loathing? How can we, you know, if that is where we are? Because I think a lot of women, they at least dip into that in midlife. I think there's an element of the judgment and the self-loathing and the, what on earth am I doing? Who am I now? How can we get out of that?
I have a couple little tools that I use continuously, and one of them is around truth. So there are things I know to be true about me, about the world, about life. When I feel good, when I feel powerful, right? I know what my strengths are. I know what my talents are. I know why people come to me for help. I know what I can contribute to the world. And I know, I guess what you'd call aphorisms, right? Like, for instance, I know in my heart that everyone's doing the best they can with what they have to work with at any point in time. I know this. It lives in my heart. Everybody doesn't, it's not everyone's truth, but it's mine. And so one of the things I've done is to collect my truths so that when I'm spinning out, into that place of self-loathing, I can bring myself back to it. What's my truth? What do I know? I think the other thing that's probably the most powerful practice that I have is this recognition that insecure thinking is not truth. And when I'm in insecure thinking, I don't make choices. It doesn't stop. It's never going to stop. You're never going to get to the point where you wake up every morning and feel amazing about yourself. And each of us has these, what my coach calls the Grand Canyon, right? That we just fall into. My Grand Canyon is that I don't really know anything. And it came from the time I was a little girl, I'm sure. I had 6 brothers and my dad favored them, right? And their opinions mattered and mine didn't really. And I think I've spent my whole life proving myself, right? Mm-hmm. Which constantly comes with the alternative, which is I can't prove this, right? I'm not legit. And so on days when my insecure thinking takes over, it's very easy for me to fall into that canyon, into that belief, just buying straight into that, right? At one point, a couple of years ago, I had a retreat and, I have 30 years experience as a brand strategist and a master's degree. And I said to my coach, I don't even think branding is a thing. I think I made this up. I think this is all nonsense. And she was like, oh my gosh, walk right now to your bookcase and look at all the university courses that you took, right, in marketing. And it's so easy for this insecure thinking to take over. And so one of the practices that I have is just watching the thoughts and not taking action on the days when there's bad weather, right? I'm the sky and my thoughts are the weather. And, if it was raining outside, I would put a raincoat on and protect myself from the rain, but I wouldn't try to change it. And I wouldn't tell myself I was a piece of crap because it was raining, right? So my thoughts aren't truth. They're just weather. That's it, moving through the sky. And I think those two practices are what keep me from, quitting.
That's really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
That's my pleasure. I love that. And the person who is amazing around the weather and the sky that I love so much is Michael Neal. I don't know if you follow Michael Neal.
No.
But he's terrific around this particular issue.
Well, I know on the Headspace app, Andy Puddicombe, he talks about thoughts just being sort of clouds and that there's always sunshine beyond the clouds. Mm-hmm. And you have to kind of remember that they are just passing. I think that's a pretty common analogy in the yoga community as well. That anyone that's learned yoga or meditation, and I went on quite a long journey there. That's an analogy that they quite often use, that they're clouds. But that for me, it doesn't feel, my thoughts don't often feel like clouds. They feel like lightning.
or torrential rain or hail or, Seattle gray, right? Yeah. So it's like, clouds makes it sound so pretty, right? Like they're floating by. They're not always floating by. Sometimes they're pounding
in January
on me.
in England.
Yeah, totally.
Very cloudy.
Mm-hmm. So, and I hear women say to me, how do I make it stop? How do I make the self-doubt stop? And self-doubt will never stop. It's a function of your brain. It's a protective function. The question is, what do I do with it?
Yeah, and not letting it stop everything.
Yeah.
Just working with it, working.
Mm-hmm. As Elizabeth Gilbert says, you can't let fear drive the car.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
You can sit in the car.
Yeah.
But you can't control the radio.
Mm-hmm. You can tolerate her.
Drive.
And, sometimes I have to thank that doubt, right? Like one of the things that was recommended to me really early on in a course I took, Debbie Ford was her name. Oh my gosh, I loved her so much, and she's passed now. Was this idea of naming this voice, right? Mm-hmm. This voice of self-doubt, because the voice in our head is not nice, right? And I named mine after my grandma, who I talk about in my book. And my grandma was a toughie, but she wasn't not nice. She wasn't a nice woman. Her name was Helen. And that voice in my head is her voice often. And I thank her and let her go. Like I know she means the best for me, right? The whole idea is don't go get yourself into a mess. Don't risk this, right? So the way to get me to stop is to tell me I'm a loser, right? Tell me it won't work. Tell me that that'll never happen for me, that wasn't meant for me, that I'm not the one for, who am I, right? To do this, write a book and get on a stage and blah, 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 right? And thanking her and, hey, Helen, I really appreciate you, but I got this, right? I see what you're trying to do here and I'm grateful, but I got this. I'll be all right.
Mm. And the voice keeps us playing small, doesn't it?
Of course, that's its job. Yeah. That's how your brain protects you, right? Don't run out the door, into chaos. You'll get hurt. Stay here.
But I know you're a big believer that women in midlife, this really is prime time, and that we should be doing something different and something big.
I think what happens is that we hit mastery, right? And I talk about this a little bit in the book, but by the time we get to midlife, we've mastered things. I mean, there are things for each and every one of us, multiple things that we are literally aces at. And, it may be something that we learn through our career. It may be something that we learn through parenting. It may be something that we've, practiced over and over. For some people, it's, an artistic thing. For some people, it's a skill set thing. And when you've achieved mastery, you can apply it in all different kinds of ways. Like, I'll give you an example. I have a woman who's a client who is I think a 3rd or 4th degree black belt. And she's run a karate studio or martial arts studio for her, all of her adult life. And she's at a point now where she's just over it. Like, I'm done with this. I don't want to do this anymore. But she's got all this mastery. So the question becomes, how do you take that mastery and repurpose it in a way that feels amazing so you can do big, bold things? And so now she's helping women executives master their own energy. And she's taken all of this skill and all of this experience and all of this knowledge and wisdom that she has from the 2 decades that she's learned martial arts and applied it in a new way. And so she has a different daily experience. She spends her day with different people. She makes money in a different way. Her daily activities are entirely different, but it's not new. It's not, I'm an absolute beginner. I'm ready, right? I've trained for this. And I think recognizing where your mastery is and giving yourself credit for that. I often ask women in sessions to say out loud, I'm an absolute expert in blank. And it's amazing how many women will say, I'm not an expert in anything. And I'm like, come on, you've lived 50 years on the planet, right? You're an expert at something. Mm. And I think owning that is part of the first step to doing big things.
That's very powerful as well. And how can we step up to both lead and influence more?
For me, the leadership and the influence comes around the change that you want to see in the world. You know, another thing that happens to us in midlife is that we get a call to contribution. So once our bodies are, you know, go through a transition to stop mothering, whether we've had kids or not, we've mothered all kinds of stuff, no doubt, right? You know, then what happens is we start to get called to contribution. How else will I show up? Am I going to contribute to the community, to the world at large, to a certain group of people, to some type of a movement, to whatever that is? And I think listening to that call allows you to lead and influence in a way that feels really natural. And some women are simply a resistance to visibility, right? I want to build a business, or I want to do this big, bold thing, but I'm afraid to be seen. I'm afraid to show myself. And so often I'll work with women on what I call their essence of influence. There's a natural way for all of us to show up. Like I have a beautiful client who's naturally a scientist. And so when she shows up online, when she does social media, she doesn't feel social, you know, and she's like, this is not natural for me. I don't want to do this. I don't want to show myself in this way. And I said, what would it feel like if you just showed up as a scientist and you just presented the data, right? Here's the data. Here's what you need to know about blah, blah, blah. And that's a very natural way for her to influence. For other women, it's very natural for me to influence as an advocate for women. You know, it's very natural for me to wake up in the morning and say, well, I don't necessarily feel confident about this, but I want to do this for all the women in my orbit. It's natural for some women to be subversive or to push back, right? It's natural for some women to be reporters. So I think some of this stuff in terms of leadership and influence has to do with leaning into our essence. You know, who am I at my core? And how do I just comfortably be that? Rather than trying to be something I'm not? How do I maximize who I am rather than changing what I think is broken or that I need to fix?
And you have a quiz, don't you, on your site? So we'll put the link to the quiz.
I do.
So people can go and do that. Sounds really cool.
Yeah, an assessment. And I have a lot of women in my orbit that influence in different ways. And I think, you know, everybody doesn't necessarily want to be a leader. That's not a word that everybody attaches themselves to. But I think everybody desires to do things they haven't done. And in midlife, often we want to circle back, right? There's a need to circle back to things we started when we were young or wanted when we were young. There's this feeling of, I'm running out of time. And if you really want to circle back and do those big things, very often they require some degree of visibility, some degree of influence, whatever that may be. And I think understanding how to naturally be influential is a powerful lesson.
It's weird, isn't it? Because a lot of women complain that we become invisible. But actually, I think a lot of us do it to ourselves.
Yeah, we fade away.
Withdraw, we fade away. And actually, we can push ourselves forward, and then we will not be invisible at all in any shape or form.
Absolutely. And even literally from a physical sense, you know, I was just talking about this with someone yesterday. There's, you know, we all give something off at any given moment, right? And if there's parts of you that you can't accept, then the tendency is to cover them up. And one of the things that happens in midlife is that literally our physical shape changes. And when it does, for a lot of women, there's a cover-up that goes on, right? It changes our posture. It changes the way we enter a room. It changes the eyes that we look for in a crowd. And that's really, it's like a self-annihilation. It's like a self-rejection. And there's a big difference between accepting accepting your body and loving it, right? But to deny it literally cuts you off. And that's where the invisibility feeling comes from, is this idea of, you know, we cover ourselves up, we cover what we've become, and then the goal really is for people not to see us, right? But at the same time, we feel invisible. And I think, you know, some of it's legit, right? Some of it comes from this crazy stuff like, you know, I read in the New York Times that in the online dating world, men peak at 50 and women peak at 18. I mean, you know, this is crazy, right? Like, it's just insane in terms of likes and clicks and swipes and whatever, right? So some of that is real in terms of the opposite sex. But a lot of it is driven by how we feel about ourselves and what we try to cover.
And that's all about shame, isn't it? It's all about shame, because we have shame associated with getting older and shame associated with menopause, which brings us back to where we started, really. It's like, we need to change all this. I
think it's also a misunderstanding of attraction. So I find that women believe that there's a normative definition of attraction. So these are attractive people and these are unattractive people. And that's not the way attraction works. Attraction is singular. I talk a lot about essence. So we each have an essence the same way that a bottle of perfume has an essence, or a bag of coffee beans, or a bottle of wine, right? It's a combination of this and this and this and this. And each of us is attracted to a different essence in all of those things. So it's not like this is attractive coffee and this is unattractive coffee. This is the essence that I love. I want this. And it's the same thing with humans. So if you show your essence completely, if you really just get into the discovery of it and you show your essence completely, people can decide if they're attracted to you or not, right? You give off the essence and they move toward it or away from it. But if you cover it up, nobody ever gets to decide. And I think that's, for a lot of women, what happens in midlife is we sort of we tone everything down, we cover everything up. And I'm a huge proponent in instead discovering what's there and showing it completely, and trusting in the way attraction really works.
We're getting some truth bombs here today. You listeners, my goodness me, everything out of your mouth is a gem. Wow, I love that as well. Very, very powerful. Because I love that. I love helping women discover their essence, discover who they are now. We are different, and yet, that doesn't make us less valuable. It makes us more valuable.
Absolutely.
Because we strip away all the crap and we strip away all the bullshit. This is us. This is who we are. And you're absolutely spot on that. That goes back to that old adage, doesn't it? There's always someone out there for everybody. There is, actually. And the closer you are to your authentic self, I think definitely the more attractive you are. That's certainly, I am drawn to authentic people.
Well, the easier it is, right? If you live with the belief and the understanding that showing myself completely is the best way to attract people who like people like me, right? Then that's the easiest way to show up. There's nothing easier than being yourself. It's the fixing and the changing and the struggling and the pretending and the show that's hard. That's hard work. And it's work that doesn't really get you anywhere. It doesn't produce. So I think that's I love that change, because it's a shift that changes everything. It really is. And it's true for it's not just true for midlife women. I just went through the last year, we went through our son applying for or auditioning for music school. And it was the same way with him. He went into the audition and he didn't know how to read music. And his thought was toward all of his deficiencies. Here's where I'm deficient. Here's what I don't know. Blah, 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 blah. And my message to him was, you got to show him what you do know, right? That your job when you walk into the room is to show them who you are, not who you're not, and let them choose if that's what they want. But if you go in there covering up and apologizing, they don't get to see who you are.
So I'm always encouraging women in particular to focus on our strengths, rather than trying to fix our weaknesses. It's just so important, isn't it? And it took me years to realise this. It's true.
And it's not even really strength versus weakness. It's just a continuum, right? Like, it's just all data. It's just, and we have these feelings that some attributes are preferable to other attributes, but it's not the case. It's just a perspective of deficiency gives us that understanding, right? Oh, she has this. I'm 5 feet tall and spent the first half of my life wishing that I were tall. And I don't really have any of those thoughts anymore. I think because I've come to the understanding that tall's not necessarily better. It's just where I'm deficient, right? If I choose to see it that way. And I think in order to get to that point, we have to be resilient to the messaging, right? And we have to be resilient to the weather.
So since you wrote the book, what have you learned about yourself?
I've learned that I think I became very aware of that sense of entitlement that I was talking about earlier, what I'll call success entitlement, that I love a quick win and that I have to watch for that. I think I've learned that I thrive on connection. And when I was young, I think I would have called that neediness. I might have even considered it ugly. But now I know that it's my source of energy, my source of joy. And on days when I am disconnected, I'm less effective and I'm less happy. And so I build connection into my life daily, and it's almost always connection with midlife women. And I've built a second half of life that's just literally involved connecting with midlife women, and I stay happy. And I think I've learned that my essence naturally allows me to lead a conversation that's a little bit dicey.
Yeah.
And so I'm leaning into that. It's an odd skill, right? It's an off skill, and I'm enjoying it. I'm having fun with it.
But it's the ability to have awkward conversations, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I thrive in it.
And make people uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's something that I would have discovered if I hadn't been resilient to things that I was, in quotations, failing at along the way, right? Because it was the conversations around the failures that women responded to. And, and then this unearths all kinds of things. And I discovered that I could hold space for those things for other people in a very real way. And it just changed the trajectory of my life.
And what would you like women to know? What are your parting thoughts as to what you really want women to know?
I think what I'd like women to know more than anything is that there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you, and you don't need to fix yourself. We're born well. We're born happy. It's our natural state to be well and happy. And you don't have to go outside yourself to find that or to fix yourself to get it. You just have to uncover it. It's right there.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, share it, and leave me a review wherever you're listening. It really helps me get the message out. You can find out more information about this episode in the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you'll find strategies, support, and resources to help make your midlife magnificent. Get clarity on how to make the most of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.